past year. And demand is a variable thing. It depends on many factors, including public policies and strategies. Now, if you look at the diagram over on the right, these are the metals and substances that are used for renewable energy, including wind, solar PV, concentrated solar, hydro, geothermal, and energy storage or batteries. And you can see that copper is used across the board. Energy storage has the most metals that are needed. Nickel is used in almost all the applications. And the thing about battery technology is that it's changing very rapidly right now. So lithium, of course, is important, and as is cobalt and nickel, but that could change as the technology changes. Next slide. So for sources of remining, we have abandoned hard rock mines in the United States, and there are certainly plenty in Europe as well. There are about 500,000 legacy and abandoned mines. This is kind of a double win because you have the benefit of extracting value in the form of metals from waste and also remediating these sites that have been affected in the past by mining activity. Existing metal mines are important because they often have the facilities that are needed to process the remined materials. The primary focus seems to be on tailings, but also smelter slag and waste rock. Coal ash, the target is, as far as I've seen, almost always rare earth elements. And then there's byproduct production with tellurium, indium, and gallium, and other important metals for remining. Next slide, please. So the first thing is you have to identify these deposits, and these are not ore deposits. They are often waste. They are waste deposits, and then you have to sample them, and that can be a little tricky. The thing about tailings that's such an advantage is that they're essentially pre-processed. They're already crushed and ground. They generally have a more consistent particle size and chemical composition and physical characteristics than waste rock, for example. But there are safety concerns for sampling wet tailings, and I'll mention that briefly later. In general, there's little information on the three-dimensional spatial, content of metal in tailings impoundments. But I wanted to show you the next slide here. This is from a antimony mine in China in a tailings impoundment. And depth is the vertical axis that goes from the surface down to 34 meters. And the bottom part is the older operations where the extraction was not as efficient. And you can see, if you do one click there, that the antimony in the tailings is 1.2%, which is a pretty good deposit, even these days. Then the methods got more efficient and the concentrations generally are lower, but things that they weren't after, like tellurium on the right, can have just as high concentrations. Next slide. So this is a general approach for characterizing and managing tailings for remining. The first important thing, of course, is to identify the deposit, and community engagement should start right in the beginning. A sampling plan needs to be created. General characterization would include like the total metal content, the mass of the material, particle size, and stability. One click. And the stability is something we don't necessarily think about we haven't in the past, but because of tailings dam failures, we are thinking about that a lot more. Then you can go to more detailed characterization like mineralogy. MLA is mineral liberation analysis. So it's not just what's there, but how easy is it to get that mineral or that metal out of the deposit? And then some of the typical analyses that we would do, like acid-base accounting and leaching. And then design and test processing approaches and testing and managing residuals to really focus on circularity, because even after remining, you're going to have some kind of a waste left over. If there's an opportunity to turn that into a product and enhance circularity, all the better. Next slide. Yeah. Okay, I'll skip over the US for this presentation. But there are a lot of ongoing and proposed characterization efforts by governments, and here's some examples. In Europe, you've probably all heard of the Critical Raw Materials Act, which is still in draft form, but about to be passed. There's an article in there, Article 26, which is recovery from extractive wastes. And there's some very good requirements in there for characterizing, inventorying, making a database, sampling, and hopefully that will stay in this final draft. There's also the EPRTR, which is the Pollutant Release and Transfer Registry. That gives total metal concentrations and waste release to land, but it's very limited. It's a little out of date. And the OECD also has an effort. But the general challenges are there's a lack of information on the chemical contents and how easily those metals can be extracted. They're a little too generic, there are data gaps, and as I mentioned, out of date. And also, and this is something I found from working on this study, is that characterization and processing generally are in the early stages of investigation, especially at the government level. Next slide. So there's certainly no shortage of tailings around the world. By one account, there are about 8,500 active, inactive, and closed tailings facilities for an estimated total of about 217 billion cubic meters of tailings. And different commodities have different amounts. By far, copper has the most tailings. And there are metals in there, in addition to copper, that we need for renewable energy technologies. In the EU, this chart here is a little busy, but it's a log scale on the right, so every step up is 10 times higher. And this was published by Blangini et al. In 2019, but it's based on 2012 estimates, so it's a bit out of date. But it does give estimates for the annual extractive waste disposed in tailings, and then the stock in tailings, which is just the total amount estimated in the EU. Next slide. I'll skip over this because it's a US slide. In general, as I mentioned, nearly all the characterization is in the evaluation phase, but there is some pilot scale and laboratories processing going on. The most common that I found was bioleaching, in other words, using microbes, that has the most upsides with the fewest downsides. And there's a lot more information on processing methods in the paper. The source materials are mostly tailings. One of the things about tailings is that they could require regrinding, which could cause a complication for processing. Also, coal ash and waste or production byproducts, even acid mine drainage and associated sludges are a potential source for renewable energy metals. And mining companies are certainly leading the charge on this. Metal targets, mostly in Remining, are focused on gold, but because of the increased demand, renewable energy metals are an increasingly important target. Rare earth in coal ash, and then legacy and modern mines for the original targets and other metals that they were not after initially. Next slide. So the project in full operation are listed here. 3 of the 5 are for gold, okay, which we're not really concerned about very much for renewable energies. And one of them, zinc, is what they were after in the first place in Australia. The first one is cobalt, which is different than what they were after in the first place. And this is in Uganda. And there's a full list in the paper of the projects that are in various stages of operation. Next slide. So I want to talk a little bit about the potential risks and benefits of remining. In general, they haven't been investigated that well. There's a need to understand more the potential effects of the environment of remining on the environment, ecosystems, communities, and workers. But if you think about remining versus virgin extraction, there are some things that are probably going to be the same. That is the potential for risk to water quality, tailings dam failures and impacts on communities, but other things are unlikely or impossible to occur, and that is, there will be no creation of open pits, so the landscape level destruction is much lower, and changes to stream flows and groundwater levels will be much less from remining. Some of the other potential risks that have been mentioned for remining are delayed closure. Keep a mine open because of remining, and you never get to the closure stage. Also, dust and reactivating pollutant pathways, and then the circularity issue of what to do with the remaining wastes. Next slide. Two examples. We know that there have been 2 tailings dam failures at remining operations, one in South Africa, and these are both quite recent. That was from retreatment or recovery of diamonds from old diamond mine spoils. There were fatalities associated with this, and the other one was in Romania, overtopping of a dam built to store cyanide leach tailings, and they were recovering gold from old gold tailings. So these are, this is certainly something to think about with wet tailings, and best practices for tailings is to filter them and decrease the amount of water in them. Next slide. So on the benefits side, the biggest benefit is potentially cleanup of mine impacted sites and improving land and water quality. There is definitely a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions compared to virgin extraction, and energy and water use, and lower capital and operating costs compared to primary mining. A couple of studies in Chile found that there was 40 to 50% lower water, energy, and other costs compared to virgin extraction. There's also an opportunity to reuse the entrained water and wet tailings after treatment, and removing risky tailings facilities is certainly a benefit. And an opportunity to create products for the remaining wastes. Generally, their talk is mostly about construction materials, depending on the characteristics of the wastes. Next slide. So this is the last slide. This is a list of what's needed to expand the reliance on mining as a viable source to add to our supply of metals for renewable energy metals. And I would say the first 2 are definitely in progress. Characterizing remine sources, prioritizing sites. Sites probably should be prioritized based on the value, the economic value, but also access, social license to operate, proximity to processing facilities, and the viability of extraction. Best practices have not really been developed. Of course, a lot of them could be borrowed from active mine operations, but there are many things that need to be considered, especially for remining. Community engagement, the characterization issues that I've mentioned, and economic potential, and then developing effective and safe processing methods and incorporating the metals into the value chain so that these metals can be used effectively to increase the renewable energy technology supply chain. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Anne. I've posted in the chat the link to Anne's study. I have now the pleasure of passing it on to David, who's the Chief Strategy Officer for the Special Products Business Area at Swedish mining company LKAB. David has been at LKAB for over 12 years now. So over to you, David, to share your expertise and to bring a real case study of remining in Europe.
Thank you, Cecilia. I'll start by sharing my presentation then, and perhaps also start by presenting LKAB, as I'm sure not everybody is aware of who we are and what we do. We are a leading mining and minerals group in Europe. We produce 85% of the iron ore in Europe from what is the world's largest underground iron ore mines in Kiruna and Malmberget, and we have an open pit mining in Svappavaara. You can see it's up in the northern parts of Sweden and northern parts of Europe above the Arctic Circle. So we have, this time of year at least, an Arctic climate. We've been in operations at these sites since 1890, which is very long for a mining company. And we produce around 26 million tons of highly upgraded iron ore products, mainly pellets for steel plants. That is what we have today, and what you see here is the iron ore train line that runs between our ports in Narvik and Luleå, where we ship out our products today. When it comes to our strategy going forward, we announced a couple of years ago that we have a transformation strategy for the company to further create more value, but also to take responsibility in the industry. One thing is going deeper into our mines that will require a new world standard for mining, and no one else can develop that. We have to be part of that. And that's autonomous, digitalized, and carbon dioxide free, of course, electrified. But also in the iron ore bit, we are looking to produce sponge iron, carbon free with hydrogen technology, which is known under the hybrid initiative that we run together with Swedish energy company Vattenfall and steel producer SSAB. And finally, we have also a strategy to extract critical minerals from mine waste. And that is what we'll talk about here. That is the remining part of our operations that we're planning. And how can we do that? Well, it starts with that we have an ongoing mine operations where the main objective is to produce pellets or sponge iron. The processes are set up so that we get the best quality iron ore product. While doing that, we of course grind the product finer and finer and separate out everything we can that is not iron. And then we roll it into pellets today and in the future into sponge iron. Part of the non-value material that is mined is then produced as an tailings material, mainly silica, but also some apatite is found in that as a byproduct. So it's part of the general mine tailings, and apatite contains phosphorus, but it also attached that are rare earth elements. So what we're planning on doing in direct adjacent to the mine site is to set up an apatite plant where we produce an apatite concentrate that we dry so we can bulk transport it on the railway. That is something that we'll then take on to Luleå, where we have a harbor facility, and we're planning an industrial park. We'll have a hydrometallurgical process where we dissolve and separate these products. The main product of this product is phosphorus. The first intermediate product there will be a phosphoric acid. That can actually be used also in the energy transition, as automotive batteries are also using phosphoric acid in an LFP combination. Our plan right now is, however, to produce mineral fertilizers. Europe imports 90% of its phosphorus today, so it's a really important part of decarbonizing and securing supply for farming and agriculture. As byproducts, well, we produce the phosphoric acid. We'll also take out rare earth elements, which I'm sure everybody's aware of. What those are primarily used in permanent magnets, both for wind farms and for electrical motors. While doing this, we'll also get a new byproduct, gypsum, which is commonly something that you get for phosphorus productions. We will, however, upgrade that into a sellable product to not create more waste. In our concept here also, we are actually collaborating with Boliden, a copper miner in Sweden. They have a pyrite tailing containing pyrite. So we will be setting up pyrite production there, which will be the base of sulfur production, so we can get sulfuric acid. And that is an input material for us, and doing so will also generate excess heat to be used as energy in the park. So that will be good for the energy balance, and we will have then fossil-free input materials for our process. To produce the mineral fertilizer, we'll also need to have ammonia. Ammonia is also very emission intense, so there we're planning on producing green hydrogen to produce the ammonia. While doing that and having ammonia, we also see the potential of producing ammonium nitrate. That is very important for us. That's a product we today buy. And that is the main production, the main input material for producing explosives. And we use around 1/3 of the explosives produced in Sweden that we produce ourselves actually, but with procured nitric ammonium nitrate. So thereby, not only will we increase our resource efficiency, but we'll also set up a new kind of process concept here, whereby we'll also be self-sufficient on some important input materials. And on the remining topic and connecting to what we spoke about before here, this will be made from our current ongoing production. So we'll take the fresh tailings. In our Arctic landscape, that is quite important because then they're not deep frozen. So much easier, much less energy intense to manage. And that is the base of plan for our project, to demonstrate and industrialize this process. We of course have tailing dams which contains big amounts of these products potentially. That will be a potential expansion for us. But as pointed out, then we need to manage other complicating factors with the dam safety, but also maintaining extraction while producing at the same time is a challenge. So that is not where we start, but that's a potential for the future. I hope that was a quick run through that everybody was able to follow and understand what we're planning on doing here up in northern Sweden.
Thank you so much, David. It was very interesting to hear more about your plans. I see some questions coming through in the chat already. David, if you don't mind to stop sharing so that I can share my screen just for, yes, thank you for some concluding remarks. Just a second. So just a quick word from Transport and Environment to wrap this up. Thanks to Anne's study, we were able to assess that, yes, there is some interesting potential for remining in Europe, especially in Scandinavia. So you have, like, on the right, which you can find also in the policy recommendations briefing that was shared in the link, an overview of what is currently available based on available data in Europe. To translate it into something practical, TNE has calculated that with remined cobalt, we could power more than 185,000 EVs on an annual basis. But moving on to the actual, what concretely is needed. So what we see, what the study strongly concluded is that we need waste characterization efforts to better understand the potential of remining, because without it, it won't actually be possible to understand what is in our waste piles across Europe, but also globally. Remining is a form of mining, so we need to apply strong mining regulations also to remining. And of course, remining does impact communities as well as indigenous communities, so we need to guarantee consultation and consent also at remining sites, as we would do for mining sites. And finally, mandating impact assessments. These are recommendations that you can find in the policy paper that are global. But zooming into our European recommendations, what TNE would like to see is the prioritization of remining projects, as well as recycling one under the CRMA, the Critical Raw Materials Act strategic project framework. We do believe that this would really boost also the interest and would provide, of course, some funding for these projects. We need a review of the EU Extractive Waste Directive to be modernized, thereby ensuring that national mining codes are brought up to the global best practice. The revision should include, of course, better waste characterization, composition disclosures, and then also addressing tailings management practices from design to management, also including remining. And finally, we do need in Europe a clean tech fund to actually support activities that are linked to both the CRMA and the Net Zero Industry Act to fund projects like the one that David described, but many more potential ones across Europe. That was super quick. I will stop here because there were some very interesting questions in the chat. I will take first a question from Melissa Barbanel, who asks, when it comes to prioritizing sites, who would get to do that? And is there interest in this from the waste owners, such as, for example, the mining companies? I will give the floor to Anne and then to David. Thank you.
Yeah. Some of the prioritization factors are pretty obvious, like how close is it to a processing facility? That's something you can figure out in advance. Some of the other ones, like social license and the characteristics in the pile itself, will need more study. And I do think that mining companies are probably best placed to do the sampling and the characterization. In the United States, we have the U.S. Geological Survey prioritizing sites and conducting their own characterization. So that kind of gives a leg up for remining. David, if you have any additional comments?
I would say, of course, for ongoing and active mines, it's in the interest of every mine operator to be as resource efficient as possible and to extract everything of value while operating. So I think that there's sufficient drives in that, but it's of course a matter of making the priority when it comes to the technical and financial possibilities.
Thank you both. We have two interesting questions from Andres Angel. I think, Andres, the first part of your question on the regulatory landscape, we've answered in the presentation, so there's a lot more that can be done. But you put out an important question, right? How important are profit considerations? So is it possible that some stakeholders, governments, for example, do this with little to no margin, given its benefits in the context of the energy transition? And then I want to also read out your second question, which hopefully the panelists can also answer. Where do we start? That's, I think, the biggest, the million-dollar question, right? Given that in many countries, the abandoned facilities and materials ownership might be unclear. Would it be better to start in the global north? What potential is there in each? So just very briefly, I can go first, like with this question, perhaps. That is one of the things that the Critical Raw Materials Act tries to do. Actually, the Critical Raw Materials Act asks member states to look at remining, basically. So both for existing facilities or facilities that are owned, or even those that are closed, but they are still owned by companies, as well as the abandoned ones. So it is a start, and hopefully other countries can follow suit. But again, as we stressed, better waste characterization is needed. Anne and David, if you would like to jump in, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think in terms of starting with the global north, that's safer in terms of regulation and some other aspects that Cecilia has mentioned. Certainly in the Iberian Pyrite Belt in Spain, there's a lot of potential there, but there's also an enormous potential in South America, certainly in Chile because of all the copper tailings deposits there. So, I mean, we have to start with characterization, and David probably has something else he could add to this.
Well, I think you touched on the financial aspects as well. And I mean, what we see in most primary production is that the grades are degrading, so lower grades. That's a financial and technical challenge. And if you look at the wet waste, then it will also be very low grades typically. So then the question is it financially viable? And if we want that, then the question is there any premiums for sustainably sourced material, regionally sourced material when it comes to this? And I think everybody would like to have priority access to any such material, but are they willing to invest more in it? And how can that be arranged?
Right. I think we do need to think about the question of incentives, providing some kind of incentive for mining companies and others. There are also some remining companies that are starting up to do this. In the United States, we have a loophole that is known as the Good Samaritan loophole, essentially. So if let's say a company wants to come in and remine wastes, they are immediately responsible for anything that happens from that. And that could also include what happened before that they had nothing to do with. So this is where, baseline evaluations before and after remining become extremely important. But I think the question of incentives should be thrown out there.
And I think, so we're past the hour by 2 minutes, but I want to tie in with one final question that, goes nicely with this discussion. Chelsea asked that she's curious to hear more from David on the company's decision making process to engage and invest in remining. What was ultimately the convincing factor for LKAB? And are you seeing similar consideration also from other industry peers?
For us, it was seeing that we have this potential. We see that it's part of every value chain starts in the mine almost, and these materials are needed. We can contribute while also doing that sustainably. And I think that's the mining generally has an opportunity to both supply the needed minerals and metals for the green transformation while also decreasing our own impact environmentally. So if we can do that, then we can find a business case for that. That is really interesting. So that's what we've been doing, both technically developing this and seeing how far in the value chain do we need to go. And we're actually stretching it a bit further than we typically have done when it comes to these type of products. So we're value adding more in our production plans now into the ready-made products to some extent.
Thank you so much, David. I want to thank everyone that has joined. Tomorrow there is the US version where you will hear, it's still half an hour, and you will hear from communities that are impacted by remining. So also like the other side of the coin. Please join if you can. I don't have the link at hand, but if you go on TNE's or Earthworks or Earthjustice social pages, you can find it there. Yes, thanks again for joining, David, and thank you so much. And we close off here the webinar. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay.